Hello everybody, I'm Weasty, and this is my first of hopefully many PicoCTF write-ups. Right now there's about 14 hours left in the competition and my team is sitting at a comfortable second place. We're quite far ahead of the third place team. We only actually have one question left, but we decided that we didn't really need to solve it just because we're far ahead enough of the third place team. We would have tried more if the third place team got more questions, but they've been stuck at their score for a while. And with how much time I already dedicated to this tournament, I'm pretty behind on all my classes, and of course, instead of actually making up my work for those classes, I'm making these videos for you guys. So let's get started. So in this video, I'm going to write up the entire Flaskcards web exploitation series. There's only 3 questions in this series, and they're all similar enough that it just makes sense to write them all up in the same video. So the first question in this series is just titled Flaskcards. The description is, we found this fishy website for flashcards that we think may be sending secrets. Could you take a look? And over on the hints tab, we have 1. Are there any common vulnerabilities within the back end of the website? 2. Is there anywhere that filtering doesn't get applied? And 3. The database gets reverted every 2 hours, so your session might end unexpectedly. That last hint probably doesn't matter too much. So before I even open up the web page, there are a few things I suspect. 1. Being that the question is titled Flaskcards rather than flashcards, I believe the vulnerability might have something to do with the Flask Python web framework. This cooperates well with this first hint right here, which mentions that the vulnerability might have to do with the back end of the website. Next, because of this second hint, talking about filtering, I believe that this vulnerability will probably be some form of injection, because filtering is usually a method to prevent special characters from being displayed and rendered in a web page. So when I open up this web page, you just get greeted by a home page telling me to log in, but I'll just go ahead and register an account first. Wow, that name was taken. Okay, and now I have to log back in. So here I have options, a home page, a create card page, list cards, and an admin page. This admin page obviously looks fishy, but being that the question seemed to have something to do with an injection, I'm also interested in this create a card page. So the first thing I tried on this create a card page was some HTML injection. Well, it didn't work. I actually tried getting an HTML injection to work for too long. In fact, when you think about the question, it wouldn't even make sense for there to be an HTML injection. HTML injections can only affect a user who actually views the page. It only affects a user on the client side. So the only time HTML injections are useful is if you can sort of get another user to view your page, which you can then run your code on. But in this website, there's no kind of like report to an admin. Usually a question will have like, bring an admin to your page so that they can check something. That right there is a huge hint that there's going to be an HTML or a cross-site script injection. But here, there's no way to do that, so this has to be something else. Now looking back to this first hint here, I decided to do some searching. And this first result here really caught my eye. I talked about how there might be an injection, and I talked about how it might have to do with Flask, so this seems like something that's very useful. Now to be honest, this web page actually didn't do a whole lot to help me out. All it really did was just give me the idea of using these double curly braces to try to get Python Flask to render something on the server side. Now I noticed that they have a get user file command, and I tried using that and it didn't even work. So I think this page was just kind of misleading a lot, but the curly brace idea was really helped me out. So I tried something basic. And when I saw 7 there, I knew this was a vulnerability. Now being that I'm not too familiar with how Flask templates work, I thought it might just be a straight up Python evaluator. So I tried doing some Python scripts just to see if it would work. Well, you can see that not only did it not work, but it actually caused the whole page to screw up, so I just deleted that. Alright, so the template injections are clearly not just a straight up Python evaluator. If so, I could have just run some system commands to get a web page, but I decided to do some more searching. So I looked for some things you can do with a Python Flask injection. And I found this source here, and I literally just skimmed through it. I was just looking for anything that they have within double curly braces that could be useful. When I came across this right here, this config.items, at this point I wasn't really sure entirely what I was looking for, so I literally just tried every single thing I found, but I put the config.items in there. And you can see here, it just gave me a huge list, and I looked through this and I actually found I'll find it sometime soon, right here that it gives you the secret key right there, and that's a PicoCTF flag, so I just submitted that and it worked out. So for this question, I can't honestly say that I knew a whole lot about it, but really just doing some simple web searching got me the flag pretty easily. Okay, now the next question in the Flaskcards series is called Flaskcards Skeleton Key, worth 600 points with a little bit less solves than the last one. The problem description is nice. You found out they were sending the secret key. Now, can you find a way to log in as admin? And over the hint section, we have what can you do with a Flask secret key, and once again, the database reverts every 2 hours. So once again, like I said in the first question, I'm not really that familiar with Flask, so I had to do some searching on what the secret key could do. So I just googled Flask secret key to see what I could figure out about it. And I found this Stack Overflow post, and I didn't look too into what this guy was asking, but all I know is when I read this first answer, I saw a lot about talking about a session. And to me, a session being written by a secret key, well, if I can make my own session, I could make myself an admin probably. So I did some more searching, and I found a really nice source. And, well, I didn't actually look at this webpage too much, but it did lead me to this one video that described the entirety of how Flask sessions work. And I'll do my own little explanation here, but this video helped me out so much, and I'll definitely go into link in the description below because it was very helpful. But before I get too ahead of myself, I'm just going to go back and look at the question and see what's different. And by the way, this link, even though it looks the same, it's actually a different port, so it's not the exact same page. I'll just register a new account. And just to test, I wanted to see if I could still do any injections here with config.items, so I just tried it again. And it looks like for this web page, they actually completely disabled the injection, so this create cards and list cards thing won't be important at all. So now I'll try to explain what I saw in that one video about Flask sessions. So the Flask session is actually broken up into 3 parts. The first part is your entire session and all of its variables, but it's base64 encoded and zlib compressed. Now note that neither of those include an encryption, so we can actually view our entire session variables, and I'll show you that in just a minute with a little Python script we can do. The second is the date that this session was made, or is it the date or maybe the date it expired, I forget. But either way, it's also base64 encoded. And lastly, we have a signature. So this is what all matters. When the server looks at your session, in order to verify that your session was actually made by the server, it checks that your variables match up with this signature. So what that means is that I can't just create my own session and set admin equal to 1 and then send it to the server because it won't match the signature. But because we have the server secret key, we can set up our own fake Python server or Python Flask server, make our own session and swap it out for this session. It should work out in the end. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to try to do is see if I can decompress and decode this first session variable to see what our true session variable is. So first thing in Python, I need to import the zlib and base64 modules. Then I'll go ahead and create a variable for the session. Next, one thing I need to mention, with base64, you need to have the correct padding in order to base64 decode a string. That's why a lot of times if you are base64 decoding something, you see a bunch of equal signs at the end. That's just correct padding to make sure it all works out in the end, so I'm just going to kind of add those at the end there. If you add 3, it'll always work. You only usually need 1 or 2, but you can just go 3 to be safe. And next I'll go ahead and print out the actual session variable. So I need to zlib decompress the base64 decode of the session. Also, I learned from that video that there's such thing as a base64 URL safe decode. I guess that just makes sure that special characters are encoded back to their correct values rather than percentage signs or whatever. Now let's try it out. And here we go. We have a fresh value, an ID, a CSRF token, and a user ID. Okay, so now that we know what our session needs to look like, we need to figure out how to actually create our own new session. Now, when I first came at this question, I tried to look up what kind of signature algorithm that Flask uses and tried to write my own script for it, and it didn't work out, and I realized, why am I doing this? I can just create my own temporary Flask server, set my session variables equal to these, and then modify them a little bit using the same secret key I had earlier, and then I could just set my session equal to what my session was in my test server. So like I said before, I'm not very comfortable with Flask, so I kind of just stole this from some website. I think it was on Stack Overflow. But basically this is just a basic Flask server that will set a session variable and return a page at the root location. So all I need to do is really just take this code and change it to match up with what I've been given. So the secret key should be equal to the secret key they gave us. Next, I want to match up the session directly with what they have, just so I'm certain that I don't make any mistakes here. So I'm just going to copy Now one thing here that might be kind of tricky is that their user ID is stored in a string, so it's not a number. But anyway, this Flask server should be working, so I'm going to go ahead and install Flask and we'll try it out. Now this is running on 127.0.0.1. So here we have our hi page, but mostly I'm just interested in the session variable. Here we have it. Now immediately I recognize that this right here does not look like what we had earlier. I remember it had a couple different letters, so let's just take a look at that again. Yeah, so the first one had an EJWL, this one is rather an EJX. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this down and replace it in my script and see what's different about it. Okay, so this is interesting. You can see that all of these strings, rather than just being like the actual ID and the actual CSRF token, looks like it's base64 decoding each individual string also. Now, this is something that I probably can't get around by just changing the values on the server. I didn't know at first, this stumped me for a long time, but I decided to just try installing older versions of Flask because it looked like this was just some kind of new optimization. What I did to decide what version of Flask to install is I actually looked at when that one video I watched was made that described the session, because in that session there were not, the strings were not base64 decoded either. So I used that one to kind of figure it out. So just to save some time, I already loaded up these websites. So this was the one YouTube video I was talking about, and you can see over here that this was published in March 22nd, 2016. So I can look at the Flask page of their release history and look for what matches up with that. So what am I looking for again? Something before March 22. Actually, you see there's a huge gap here between May 2016 and June 2013, but it would have had to have been before here. So the first version I tried was actually 0.10.1, and that one didn't work either. And then I tried 0.9, and that one didn't work either, but it was different. Then in the end, 0.1 worked. So I'll just show you how to install that, but I don't want to go through the whole process of installing and uninstalling a bunch of different versions. It took a while. Okay, so now let's replace our version with version 10.0. Now we can try one more time with this Flask server. I forgot to close out the last server, sorry. Now we can see our new session variable. Well, it looks very similar to our last one, so if this is even mostly similar, it's probably going to be actually the same, but I'll check them both just to make sure. Oh my gosh, the padding again. And yes, these look absolutely identical. So now that we know we can forge our own session variables, we have to figure out what we want to change in order to get admin access. The first thing I tried doing was just setting the user ID equal to 1 because I figured there might be something about being the first user and being able to access the web page. Now one thing that took me way too long to realize, because I'm so used to using a certain module when I make web servers that will automatically refresh the backend every time it's updated, is that I need to close a Python server and open it back up. I spent so long on this, I kept changing my session and whatnot, and then realizing it never actually changed, and that's why my code wasn't working. So I'll just close out of my server and run it again. Now I can come back here and get this session, and I want to go ahead and check it with my script again, just to make sure I actually set the user session to 1. And there we have the user ID 1. Oh, session 3. Oh, I think I was doing some debugging earlier, but so now the user ID is set to 1. So to actually change my cookies, I'm going to take my practice server, and I'm using a Firefox extension. It's called Cookie Editor. I think it's not the most popular cookie editor, but the second most popular one, but I found it more useful, so I use this one. And I can look here at the session variable, and it just gives me the whole string. So even though in our little cookies display here it shows the session broken up, that's just because it kind of assumes that the dots in the session mean like different sections, which is what they are, so it's useful that it does that. I'm going to go ahead and copy this whole cookie, and then on my home page I'm going to replace that with my cookies here. Save that, then try going to the admin page, and here we go. There's the flag. Okay, so the third and final Flaskcards question is called Flaskcards and Freedoms, worth 900 points. with 230 solves. This question actually was not that difficult. It has 230 solves, and for being 900 points, you can see it should be closer to like maybe around 50 solves. I was kind of upset that this was the most difficult web question, or it wasn't the most, the most difficult web question was Lambdash, but it was the web question worth the most amount of points. Because when I go over the solution of it, you'll see it really wasn't that hard. I pretty much just did exactly what I'd done in the first question, just a bunch of Googling until I found something. But anyway, the description here is, there seems to be a few more files stored in the Flashcard server, but we can't log in. Can you? And the hints tab, there's more to the original vulnerability than meets the eye. Can you leverage the injection technique to get remote key execution? So these first two hints make me seem like this question is going to be pretty similar to the first question. Register an account. I'll try out the injection just to make sure it's still there. Okay, so it still works, but when you look at our config items, you see we don't have flag shirt up here. Now, something I actually didn't try is that there's another secret key right here. I wonder if you could just use that secret key to become admin again, like the last question. But I kind of thought about that, and even if that was the solution, it clearly wasn't the intended solution. So once again, for the millionth time, I'm not very familiar with Flask, so I did some Googling to kind of figure out what are some more things you can do with Flask template injections. So I searched up for what some past CTFs have done with template injections just to see what I could find. And I found this Tokyo Westerns write-up, which is very useful. And to be honest, I didn't actually, I really didn't read this. I kind of just went through and looked for whatever things they tried in their curly braces just to see what I could find. So you can see here they tried config, which was no different from config items, but I have self down here, so I tried that. It just said template, there was nothing useful there, so I kept going. Request.environment, I thought that might be useful. You can see just a bunch of random variables. I couldn't find anything useful here. So I kept digging. And I found this one right here, this URL underscore 4, whatever, globals. And this is what ended up getting me the flag, not directly, but I'll show you what I mean. So this one is huge. And I looked through what's here, and I noticed something interesting. I noticed that I had functions here. And so I kind of looked through all the functions, looked for what I have, and I noticed I have like, I have ID here, I have div mod, I have pow. It looks like I just have like all the imported Python functions. So I actually tried, like, by any chance is the OS function in here. And it literally is. OS is right here. So now that I have OS, I can just go ahead and run my own scripts here. So let me go back and, so it would just be this.os, and let me just see if that actually works out. I'm gonna go ahead and delete these other ones just so they're not all in the way. And here we have the module OS from Python. So next thing I'm gonna try to do is I'll just try to list out what's currently in the directory. And I got something interesting, so it didn't actually work. Okay guys, so I did something very dumb. That last take I didn't understand why this code right here wasn't working, and I realized I just forgot the fact that you have to call the system command that's part of OS, because OS is just a package or a module, whatever you want to call it, and you have to call the system command to actually run system commands. It's funny because this actually isn't the solution, but I was going to explain why it didn't work, but then I didn't even get around to it. So anyway, down here at the end you see all we have is a 0. So why do we get a 0? Well, the reason is because when Python runs system commands, it doesn't route the output back through Python. And I'll show you what I mean right here. So you can see that I can see the results of os.system, but that's running, like, it's weird how it works. This is running separately from Python. I can't actually access the output of this in Python if I try setting a variable equal to it, for instance. Oh, sorry, I forgot this isn't JavaScript. You can see that x just equals 0, and I'm guessing 0 just means that the command worked fine. So I had to find a way to run this command without using system. So I'll do some quick searching on what kind of functions are available in the OS module and see what looks interesting. Of course there's a lot here, but what eventually caught my eye was os.popen. And the description says open a pipe to or from command. So what a pipe does is basically tells you where the output of a command goes. So the reason why os.system wasn't working is because it was piping the output directly into standard out. So we never actually got the code in Python. But if we use popen, it should pipe the output of the command back into Python so we can then read it later. So I'm going to try this out in my own shell just to see if it works. We can call a dir function on X just to see what's there. Of course, there's a read function here, so that looks like that'll be it. Even though there's an annoying /ends here, I'm sure I can handle it. So I'll go ahead and try running this on their server then. You can see here the flags, or the files I have are app, flag, server, and obviously I'll just go ahead and cat out flag. And there we go. There's our flag. Alright everyone, well thanks so much for watching. As always, feel free to leave some comments, let me know how I did, let me know if I can improve. I'm still pretty new at making videos, so I'll take any suggestion I can get. And also, feel free to leave a comment if you want me to write up any specific questions.